Well, I want to show you how to configure what's known as a TIG stack. Uh, that stands for Telegraf, InfluxDB, and Grafana. So together, InfluxDB, Telegraf, and Grafana are three open source tools that are used together for monitoring and visualizing time series data. Now, before I get into the demo, I want to walk through the presentation so we have a little background. First, what is InfluxDB? So that's going to be the I in TIG. All right. So InfluxDB is a time series database. Okay. It's optimized for storing and querying large amounts of time stamped data. So that's what makes a time series. Its benefits being it's very high performant. So it's designed to handle high write and query loads for monitoring, IoT, and real-time analytics. And it has a lot of flexible use cases, suitable for a variety of use cases ranging from infrastructure monitoring and real-time analytics. So infrastructure monitoring, that's just gonna, say it lends itself well to cloud applications. All right. And what is Telegraf? Telegraf is a plugin driven server agent. So it's going to collect and send metrics and events from databases, systems, IoT sensors, for example. And it's flexible. It can collect data from a variety of different data sources and send it to InfluxDB for storage and analysis. And it's one of the more integral parts of the TIG stack. So it's what gets everything going. So it's just generating the metrics for the entire stack. And finally, what is Grafana? Grafana is well known. It's a data visualization software. It allows us to visualize data from different data sources. And the data source that we're going to be using Grafana to configure is going to be InfluxDB itself. Okay. All right. So let's kind of get right into the heart of this presentation. So first things first, I want to show you how I got everything set up. All right. I'm going to Docker Hub and I'm reading the documentation, and it's kind of give you a little tip on actually how to do this. Whenever you do, set up a Docker container, you definitely want to be looking at the instructions for how to use it. And so in this case, for InfluxDB, we have an automated setup. Okay, so that means that there's like required. These are environment variables. These environment variables are required to actually get the database up and running. Okay, so this is a Docker Compose file. So in this Docker Compose file, I'm basically providing everything that the document tells me I need to provide. Specifically, these the 4, 5 environment variables. Okay, so let's kind of take a look at these. So the first thing is going to be the username. Second is going to be the password. So we also need to configure what's known as an organization, the name set to the system's initial organization. That's going to be important in a moment. And a Docker InfluxDB init bucket. So it's a name to set for the system's initial bucket. So as I can understand, that initial bucket is just going to be, it's a container that's going to hold all the metrics that we're going to use, for, the system that we're going to be monitoring. All right. So that's why I configured all these. So without these being set, we would not be able to, launch the application correctly. Okay. All right. So the next service here is going to be a Telegraf. Okay. Again, Telegraf is an agent that's going to collect, metrics from, whatever we tell it to. Excuse me, whatever we tell it to. It could be a system. It could be like an endpoint that's giving off metric data. So in our case, this Telegraf here, an agent again for collecting metrics and writing them to InfluxDB or other outputs. In our example, we're going to monitor the Docker engine host. Okay, so it's like it says. So one common use case for Telegraf is to monitor the Docker engine host from within a computer. Okay, the recommended technique to mount the host file systems in the container and use the environment variables here is going to be here. So we're just going to be monitoring, the Docker engine on my machine, okay, and visualizing it. All right, so this is going to give us like a lot of metadata into the performance of Docker as a service running on my machine. And this right here, it tells us how to actually mount all of the volumes in addition to setting the correct environment variables. So this needs to be translated over into Docker Compose. I recommend using, OpenAI for that, or ChatGPT. It's very helpful. Okay, so that's how we got this right here. Okay, so this is just going to allow us to monitor the Docker engine host. So it's just allow us to monitor the performance of Docker running on my machine. Okay, and it's going to be using what's known as a telegraf.conf. So we also need to use this telegraf.conf to set that up. So we can get it. We'll get into the let's get into it now. So whenever we configure this telegraf.conf, here it goes. It says right here, telegraf.conf. We need to be able to configure in like the inputs. So it's just basically collecting, the metrics and the intervals for the system that it's gonna be writing into the database. All right, so that's why we need this telegraf.conf. Okay. All right, so it tells us how to load this file as a volume so that it's configured inside the container. And this command is also very interesting too, because it also sets the permissions so that this Docker socket can actually, so that the Docker in the container can actually read the socket on my machine. Okay, so this is a very important statement too. I can give you the URL where I actually got that to get this to work. This won't work without this either. Okay. All right. And finally, we have Grafana. Okay. Grafana, this is going to be a visualization software. All right. And so I'll show you how to configure Grafana to use InfluxDB as a data source. So without further ado, let's get everything spun up. So I'm going to start from scratch. Okay. So let me do a Docker Compose up. Docker Compose up just basically launches all these containers so they can speak to each other after you configure it correctly. So we got all these statements here: InfluxDB, Telegraf. Okay, so that's fine. All right, so it's giving us a message saying, hey, failed to write metric. And I'm actually glad that we see this, because I haven't configured. I previously had a recording I had to stop, but that's talking about this token right here. This token no longer exists anymore. We're going to have to create a new token, and we're going to see how that affects these logging statements. You see, so right now it says unauthorized. It gave us a 400. Well, that's good. That means it's okay. There's a problem on our end. We need to configure the correct security credentials. So let's do that right now. So in order to access the InfluxDB service, we need to access that on port 8086, which is this. Okay, let's sign in. So it's asking us for the username and password, which are these environment variables I set. Username and password, Cloud Shepherd. Okay, hit sign in. Okay, so we have to. I'll just kind of give you a just fast forward. I had to go through and read the documentation on how actually how to set all this up, with Influx documents. And so in order to get the token that we need, the security object that we need to first go to data. and we're going to go to tokens here. And we want to go to generate tokens, and we want to get a read-write token. So this just allows, like it implies, this allows any service to read and write data into InfluxDB. Okay, and we configured these buckets. So we want to say, hey, this and with this token, anybody can read from all buckets, and they can write from all buckets. Okay, we can just say this one is like YT for YouTube. All right, so that's just a description there. So again, this is a security object. It's giving the permissions for anyone who has this the ability to read and write from all the buckets. So it's basically view all the data and update the data as it needs to, which is what we need. So token was created successfully. Let's go ahead and hit this guy, and we get the security object. Okay, this is the token. Summary of access permissions, buckets, read and write. Now, if we go back to telegraf.conf, we want to replace this one. We want to replace this token, which is from another demo, with this one. We updated it. Okay. And while we're here, we also want to go ahead and configure the URLs. Okay. So basically the target, where this is Telegraf. This is the agent that's scraping, that's getting the data from the system. We got to point it somewhere, okay? We want to point it to InfluxDB. Remember, it's called TIG. So T for Telegraf, I for InfluxDB. So we want to send it over to InfluxDB. And, because we're using Docker, in Docker, this is all in the same network, and this is Docker Compose. So the Docker container name, that's going to be the DNS name. That's how we actually reference these containers use in networking in Docker. So we want to say we want to access InfluxDB through this URL. All right, which is the same one I used to actually, similar that I actually used to access that user interface to log in. Okay. So we have to configure the URL, the token, the organization, and the bucket. Remember, so these are already configured. So the bucket and the organization. Okay, so we've already configured those for the InfluxDB. Okay, so now that we have those in here, we just gotta stop everything, and we can start it back up. See, again, we were seeing those unauthorized access because we had their wrong token. But now let's hit Docker Compose up. Now that we have the right credentials in here. Okay, and let's see Telegraf. Let's see some Telegraf statements here. We should start to see those soon. Okay. Okay, so that's some kind of error in the plugin, but that's not the same as the 400 like access errors we were seeing before. So let's just go ahead and see. So now this is spun up. Let's go ahead and we got our log back in again. All right, so now that we do that, we see that it's actually writing to, so this is Telegraf. So Telegraf is actually writing to these buckets now. So if we go to this bucket, we start to see all of these Docker related metrics here. Okay. Okay, so that's just because I tried to log in after I stopped the service. All right, so we get to see all of these. So I'm not an expert with using Flux because this is it's just a querying language that is brand new to me. But I was doing this a little earlier, so the histogram actually will kind of show us some data, and we just spun this up, so we may have to give this a moment here. So I tell you what I'm going to do in the meantime is I want to go over to Grafana and set that up, until we start to see some metrics over here. Let me just see if I can get something here in the meantime. But this is completely normal from what I just saw. Let's see here, and because we just set this up, it hasn't even been 5 minutes yet. So let's just give it some time. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we want to set up Grafana. So we accessed Grafana on port 3000. Okay. So localhost 3000. Okay, so by default, the username and password are admin, so we're just gonna enter those in for the first attempt. Let's get this out the way, and we just want to enter that again just so we can get where we need to go. All right, so whenever you log into Grafana for the first time, this is exactly what you'll see. See some data sources. So we can use InfluxDB as a data source to Grafana, okay, which is this guy right here, InfluxDB. Now we're using InfluxDB2, so that's just, it actually says it right here, supported for InfluxDB2. That's the container, so that's the container that we're using. Image is InfluxDB2. So we need to be using Influx, but we need to be using Flux here as a query language. Okay, and to configure all the connection details, we actually have most of that already over here because this is Telegraf. It's already writing to InfluxDB, so it's basically the same thing on the Grafana end. We just need to be able to tell it how to read and write, or definitely how to read from InfluxDB. Okay, so we have that URL. We only have also the basic authentication. Let's go ahead and get that. So remember, the basic authentication, that's just going to be the username and password. I may need to look into this inputs.exec. All right, so we just copied these from Docker Hub, so the documentation. So if it's throwing off an error, I'll need to look into that. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. Okay. Cloud Shepherd and Cloud Shepherd. Okay. And we want to get the InfluxDB details. Okay, so those details. It's definitely going to start with the organization. So these are all the same as the environment variables we set before. I showed this. So everything we need is right here in this Telegraf configuration file. Okay, and again, we got most of this stuff right from the Docker Hub documentation here. So organization is that cloudshepherd.org. This token, that's the security object. This is gonna, give us access. It's gonna authorize us to access the database. So you copy that in here. The default bucket, I guess the bucket is just gonna be an object that's gonna store all the metrics that we're gonna need to query in this time series database. And so we have all these values here. So now let's test and see if we have everything set correctly. Look at that. So I like it. I like Grafana because it just tells us right away in nice visual cues, hey, that this bucket is this data source is working. So that's what's up. So we save it. All right. So the next thing we want to do is just try to go ahead and configure a dashboard. Now with Grafana, like the way to do it, I would tell you is just to you can actually get the pre-made dashboards. So basically just go to Google and say, hey, I need a dashboard for InfluxDB2, Telegraf, Docker. So I want to try this one to see if it works. So I have you basically copy the dashboard ID. So create a dashboard. You want to go down here to import a dashboard. So you paste that ID in here and you hit load. and it gives us, so InfluxDB2 Docker dashboard. So let's hit import, and we want to select the data source, which is InfluxDB. Look at that. That's it. Boom shakalaka. That's our data. And that's it. That's how you do it. So yeah. So I mean that's how you actually kind of get this up and running. So I don't want to make this this YouTube very long. So listen, I want you to go ahead and if you haven't done so, support my channel, liking and subscribing. Please share. I'll be making more of these videos depending on the feedback. And if you have any questions, again, just leave them in the comment section. And I look forward to making more content for everyone. Thank you and have a good day.